Today was a funny, grotesque, absurd day. It is now 11 o'clock at night. I'm sitting in my little room reviewing it. It all started with my having to go to the casino to play for Polina. I took all of her 1,600 gulden, but under two conditions. First, that we were not going to play in 50-50, if I win, that is. And second, that Polina would explain to me that same night why she needed to win some money, and how much precisely. I simply cannot make myself believe that it is just the money. Apparently, the money is needed as quickly as possible for some particular purpose, she promised to tell me, and I went. It was tremendously crowded in the gambling halls. How shameless and how greedy all these people are. I forced my way to the very middle and stood right next to the croupier. Then I began timidly trying my game, betting 2 or 3 coins at a time. Meanwhile, I was watching and I noticed a thing or two. It seemed to me that calculating your chances really means rather little, and certainly isn't as important as some gamblers make it out to be. They sit there with sheets of graph paper before them, mark every stroke, reckon, compute the odds, calculate, and finally place their bets. Then they lose, exactly as we, simple mortals, who play without calculating anything. But then again, I came to one conclusion which is, I think, correct. There is, in fact, though not a system, some sort of order in the sequence of fortuitous chances, which is, of course, very strange indeed. For instance, it will happen that after 12 straight numbers from the second dozen, the third dozen will finally come up. Twice, let's say, it will hit there, then switch to the first dozen. Having fallen on the first dozen only once, it will then return to the second dozen with 3 or 4 straight hits, whereupon it is once more the third dozen with 2 straight numbers, and back to the first dozen for a single time, and again 3 straight hits in the middle, and so on, in the same fashion for an hour and a half or 2 hours. 1, 3, and 2. 1, 3, and 2. This is very amusing. There will be a day, or a morning, for example, where red and black will alternate almost without any order, shifting every moment, so that red or black won't turn up more than 2 or 3 times in succession. Next day or next night it will be nothing but red. It will happen that red, for instance, will come up as many as 22 times in a row, and that it will continue that way for some length of time, say the whole day. I learned a great deal about these things from Mr. Astley, who spent the whole morning at the gaming tables without once placing a bet. As for myself, I lost every penny I had, and very quickly too. I put 200 gulden on even right of the bet, and won. Bet another 5 and won again, and so 2 or 3 more times. I think I must have picked up about 4,000 gulden in 5 minutes or so. This is where I should have quit, but some kind of strange sensation built up in me, kind of challenge to fate, a kind of desire to give it a flick on the nose or stick out my tongue at it. I placed the largest bet aloud, 4,000 gulden, and lost. Then, flushed with my loss, I took out all the money I still had left, staked it on the same spot, and lost again, after which I walked away from the table, stunned. I actually couldn't comprehend that it was I to whom this had just happened, and I didn't tell Polina of my losing until a while later, shortly before dinner. In the meantime, I wandered through the park aimlessly. At dinner, I was again in an excited frame of mind, just as 3 days earlier. The Frenchman and Mademoiselle Blanche were dining with us again. It turned out that Mademoiselle Blanche had been at the casino in the morning and had witnessed my exploits. Since she was talking to me this time, she seemed to be paying more attention to what I was saying. The Frenchman took a shorter way and simply asked me if I had really lost my own money. Apparently he suspects Polina. In short, there is something going on here. I lied without hesitating, saying that it was my money. The general was extremely surprised. Where did I get that kind of money? I explained that I started out with 100 gulden, that 6 or 7 straight wins, doubled, had brought me up to 5 or 6,000 gulden, whereupon I had lost everything in 2 turns. All this, of course, sounded plausible enough. As I was explaining it, I stole a glance at Polina, but couldn't make out nothing from her face. She let me go through with my line, however, and did not see me right, from which I concluded that I was correct in telling my lie and that it was to remain a secret that I had played for her. In any case, I thought to myself, she owes me an explanation and promised me only this morning to reveal something to me. I had thought that the general would reprimand me somehow, but he said nothing. However, I noticed a worried and uneasy expression on his face. Perhaps in his straitened circumstances it was simply painful to him to sit there and hear how such a respectable pile of gold had, within a quarter of an hour, come into and passed out of the hands of an improvident fool such as I. I suspect that he had a rather hot encounter with the Frenchman last night. They were shut up together for a long time, talking heatedly about something. The Frenchman left looking irritated, and early this morning he came back to see the general again, very likely to continue yesterday's conversation. Having listened to the story of my gambling loss, the Frenchman remarked caustically, even spitefully, that I ought to have had more sense than that. I don't know why he had to add that. Though a great many Russians were gamblers, Russians were, in his opinion, lacking in talent even for gambling. Yet, in my opinion, roulette is simply made for Russians, I said. And when the Frenchman responded to my comment with a contemptuous sneer, I observed that surely I had to be right, since by saying that Russians were gamblers I was certainly abusing them far more than praising them, so there was no reason to doubt my statement. "And on what do you base your opinion?" asked the Frenchman. "On the fact that the faculty of amazing capital has become, through a historical process, virtually the main point in the catechism of the virtues and qualities of civilized Western men. A Russian, on the other hand, is not only incapable of amassing any capital, but even when he squanders it, does so to no purpose and in hideously bad form. Nevertheless, we Russians need money too," I added, "and consequently are very fond of it, and susceptible to methods such as, for example, roulette, allowing one to get rich suddenly, in 2 hours, and without work. We find this exceedingly alluring, and since we gamble to no purpose, and also without real effort, we tend to be losers." "You may be right to some extent," the Frenchman remarked smugly. "No, you are not right, and you ought to be ashamed to speak like that of your country," observed the general, sternly and with authority. "For goodness' sake," I answered, "really, who can tell which of the two is more repulsive, Russian shapelessness and lack of discipline, or the German method of saving money by honest work?" "What a monstrous thought!" exclaimed the general. "What a Russian thought!" exclaimed the Frenchman. I laughed. I wanted very much to provoke them. "Personally, I would much rather spend my whole life in a Kirghiz nomad stand," I cried, "than worship the German idol." "What idol?" cried the general, getting angry in earnest. "The German method of accumulating wealth. I have not been here long, but yet I must tell you that what I have managed to observe and to verify makes my Tatar blood boil. So help me, I want no part of these virtues. Yesterday I took a hike of 6 or 7 miles around the countryside. I'm telling you, it's all exactly as in those edifying German picture books. They have here, in every house, a father who is extremely virtuous and extraordinarily honest. So honest you dare not go near him. I hate honest people whom one is afraid to approach. Every such father has a family, and in the evenings they read instructive books aloud to each other. Elms and chestnut trees rustle over the little house, sunset, a stork on the roof, and all of it so extraordinarily poetic and touching. Please don't get angry, General, and allow me to make it as touching as possible. I can remember how my own father, God bless his soul, used to read from similar books to my mother and myself, and also under the linden trees in our front garden. So I am in position to judge these things. Well then, each and every one of these families around here is in a condition of complete servitude and submission to their father. They all work like mules, and they all save money like Jews. Suppose father has already saved up so and so many gulden and is counting on his eldest son to take over his shop or his piece of land. And so the daughter is left without a dowry, and she becomes an old maid. Also, the younger son is hired out to slave for someone else, or so is sold for a soldier, and the money realized is added to the family fortune. This is really done here. I have inquired about it. And all this is done out of honesty alone, and honesty so intense that the younger son who has been sold actually believes that he was sold from out of honesty alone. And that's really ideal when the victim himself rejoices as he's led away to slaughter. What else? What is more, the eldest son isn't any better off. He has found his Amalkhan, and their hearts are united, but he can't marry her because they haven't saved enough gulden yet. So they wait virtuously and sincerely and with a smile let themselves be led to slaughter. Amalkhan's cheeks have already grown hollow, and she is wasting away. Finally, in some 20 years or so, their fortune has grown. A lot of gulden have been saved honestly and virtuously. Father gives his blessings to his 40-year-old firstborn and his 35-year-old Amalkhan, her chest dried up and her nose red. As he does so, he sheds tears, reads them a moral sermon, and dies. The eldest son now becomes himself a virtuous father, and the same story starts all over again. In 50 or 70 years, the grandson of the first father has already realized that amounts to a considerable capital, which he proceeds to hand down to his son, who in turn leaves it to his son, and he to his, so that after 5 or 6 generations you have got Baron Rothschild himself, or Hoppe and Company, or the devil knows whom. Well, isn't it a majestic spectacle? 100 or 200 years of continuous toil, patience, intelligence, honesty, character, firmness, economy, a stork on the roof. What more do you want? Why, you can't possibly top that. And so, from that standpoint, they then begin to judge the whole world and to punish the guilty, meaning those who are in any way unlike them. Well, sir, that's what it amounts to. I'd much rather indulge in debauchery, Russian style, or make my fortune at roulette. I don't want to be Hoppe and Company in 5 generations. I need my money for myself. Nor am I willing to consider my person a necessary accessory to capital. I realize that I've been talking dreadful nonsense, but that's all right. Such are my convictions. I don't know whether there is much truth in what you've been saying, the general said thoughtfully, but I know for certain that you begin to swagger insufferably the moment you are allowed to forget yourself even a little. As was his habit, he failed to finish the sentence. Whenever our general would broach a subject which was even slightly more significant than ordinary small talk, he could never finish his sentences. The Frenchman was listening casually with rather wide-open eyes. He had understood almost nothing of what I had said. Polina was just looking with a sort of haughty indifference. She seemed not to hear what I or anyone else was saying at table that day.